I'm going to ask you to grab your Bibles and turn to the book of John, chapter 11. And we start this month on the theme of awakening. And I'm going to be talking about the complete opposite. I know this theme is awakening, and I am on theme. But tonight I want to talk to you about death. I want to talk to you a little bit about death tonight. And this is a unique message for me because I'm really big into notes. I'm really big into formulating a plan in a real structured message. It helps me stay within guidelines and helps me to leave my opinion out of things, right? But in this particular message, the more I tried to put it into a format, the more God just messed it up. And so I'm going to share what God has placed upon my heart, because a lot similar to what Connie was talking about, I feel like I can preach this particular message with my eyes closed. Only because the grace and the love of God and the awakening the Lord has done in my own personal life, I feel like this is just a piece of me. And so I want to share a little bit today about death. And don't even have a title for this message. And so I want to share with you out of the book of John, chapter 11. And I'm going to be skipping through. It's a very familiar portion of Scripture and a story. It's about Lazarus. And I'm going to be just skipping through a few verses because tonight, what I want to talk about and what I really want to go over tonight has a lot to do with death. And so to sum it up and to bring this story into view, we know that Lazarus was a friend of Jesus. Everybody say he was a friend of Jesus. He was related to Mary and Martha, who were also friends of Jesus. Jesus loved them. Jesus loved them dearly. And here was a man who we don't really know what he got sick from, but he got sick. And in the process of him getting sick, his sisters tried to get a hold of Jesus, try to get Jesus to come and help out in the situation. They knew who Jesus was. They knew what Jesus can do. And they needed help from Jesus. But Jesus does something unique. He does something that doesn't make sense. He does something that just completely blows their mind and everybody else's mind. When he was needed, what seemed like needed at the most, he decided to delay. He decided to hang out where he was at. And he decided to really just postpone things. And it just really baffles, I'm sure it baffled Mary and Martha. I'm sure it baffled people that read this. It baffled me, just why would Jesus prolong this? He could have prevented the whole thing, being who Jesus was. But he decided to delay it. And he has a reason, but it's just it's a heavy story because Lazarus, instead of getting better, dies. He dies and Jesus shows up on the scene 4 days later, after Lazarus dies, and then decides to perform one of the greatest miracles of all time. And, a lot of times we read that story and we see, man, it's heavy, right? He raised somebody from the dead. But I'm more interested in why God would allow it to go that far. Why would God allow it? But more importantly, Jesus says something in the scriptures that really just made me think. And I'm praying that today you'll be able to follow the course of what it is that the Lord has placed upon my heart. You have John 11? In verse 1, it says, now a man named Lazarus was sick. And if you skip down to verse 3, it says, so the sisters sent word to Jesus, Lord, the one you love is sick. And then Jesus responds and says, this sickness will not end in death. Comes out of Jesus' mouth. Yet, a few scriptures later, Lazarus dies. Let me just stop there for a minute. I want to propose a couple questions to you. This came out of Jesus' mouth, that this sickness will not end in death, yet a few days later, Lazarus dies. In verse 11, Jesus is speaking to his disciples. He says, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep. Everybody say fallen asleep. But I'm going there to wake him up. See, Lazarus in this story and in this chapter, and you can read it on your own time. Just wanted to give you a little portion there. Lazarus dies and gets buried in a tomb. And 4 days after his death, Jesus shows up, right? Both of the sisters, Mary and Martha, they plead before Jesus. See, both of these sisters, if you read the story, when Jesus finally shows up, both of the sisters come and they're pleading with them, and they're really trying to get a grip on why Jesus didn't show up. And they were so certain that their brother was dead that the whole conversation has changed. It's no longer, Jesus, can you help him? It's, why didn't you show up? Yet, if you look at Jesus' conversation, in Jesus' words, it's completely different. Jesus continues to talk and continues to say that Lazarus will rise again. So, from one set to the other set, the set of sisters were certain that Lazarus was dead and the situation was over. Yet to Jesus, he was certain that the situation was not over. So what, I ask you, can be more final than this? I mean, was Jesus in denial of what had just happened? I mean, this was something that had happened before everybody's eyes. Not only had he died, but he had been put in a tomb. Why would Jesus tell his disciples that Lazarus was asleep when it was very clear and it was very obvious that Lazarus was not sleeping? He was in a tomb, wrapped like a mummy, in death clothes for 4 days. Why would he tell his disciples that? Why? So recently, as of this last week, right, we were able to take a trip to Panama. And in going to Panama, it was a 7-hour flight. Thank God we got a direct flight. Amen. I know some didn't get a direct flight, but even 7 hours, it's not as bad as South Africa, but 7 hours is still 7 hours, no matter how you look at it. And so we were on the plane for 7 hours, and one of the things that happens after sitting down for 7 hours is you stand up and your legs asleep. And those of you that have been on the plane know what I'm talking about, right? You stand up and all you feel is pins and needles, right? You try to walk it off. And this particular trip, I kept feeling it. My legs are falling asleep, trying to get up. And that feeling of having a limb that doesn't work, having a limb that is falling asleep, doesn't that hurt? And not only does it hurt, it kind of throws your whole vibe off. And it takes a minute to get back to normal. And I want to talk about things in our lives that fall asleep. I want to talk about things in our lives that Jesus looks at and sees that they've fallen asleep. Now, maybe to us, there's things in our lives that we will go as far as to say that they're done, that they're over. Like Mary and Martha, they seen their brother, he was dead. And there's dreams, there's plans, there's visions, there's giftings, there's different things that maybe some of us have had in our lives that we've written off, we've buried, we've wrapped in grave clothes, and we said, we're done with that. This is no longer alive. This is no longer part of my life. It just didn't work out the way I was supposed to work out, and we've buried it in the tomb. And to us, it's over. But to Jesus, it's just sleeping. So before I get into, going somewhere with this, amen. First of all, I want to thank God. Right? I'm working completely backwards here. Right? Really, really heavy message that's on my heart, so I really, really want to share it. But want to thank God for the opportunity to share here. And always, Pastor and Child, thank you so much to pastoral staff. It's always a privilege to share behind this pulpit. And, Panama was a must for me. I heard it, and it wasn't something that was really being announced because it was more of a Spanish thing. It was more of a Spanish push. And so, but when I heard that there was a fight in Panama, right? There was a frontline fight going on in Panama. I felt it in my heart. And I don't know about you, but I've never stopped putting in work. Amen. I used to put in work for the devil, and it's the same way now. I just want to know where the fight's at. Amen. It could be over on Princeton or it could be in Panama, but I want to be part of the fight. Amen. And when I heard it, it wasn't even a question. It was just, okay, we need to make this happen. And in going, traveling over there and all the doors that God opened, I just knew that it was a sovereign move. And before going the couple days before, we had our prayer summit, and Pastor Gerald gave me a word. Over in the corner, he grabbed my head, right, and gave me a word. And that word was resounding on the plane, what he had said. And when we got over there, it just there's nothing that can really describe what took place over there. Those of you that have been on that plane and been on that crusade, you know that things change. There's a different atmosphere. And in going over to Panama, just everything is it was just geared immediately to getting in on this flow, getting in on this fight. And the power and the atmosphere that was there was powerful. It was powerful. It was powerful to see young people getting a hold of God. It was powerful to see this team of not just youngsters. There was quite a few OGs on that team, amen, and people that had come from all over the world. They brought like 16, 17 people from Cuba. There was people from Mexico. There was people from all over the place. And not everybody spoke Spanish. I'd say more than half didn't speak Spanish. But just the atmosphere itself was electrifying. And as we prepared ourselves and we would go out to these streets, and the city of Panama City is huge. It's 1.2 million people in downtown, and the surrounding areas was another million. So you got a whole city of 2.2 million people, in a landmass probably the size of San Francisco. Huge downtowns. But in the middle of those downtowns, there was Victory Outreach people. Amen. In the middle of those places, we're talking about 50, 60-story projects. Just stuff that would blow your mind. That would blow your mind to see just from one extreme to the other, right across the street. You have these beautiful downtown high-rises, and you go 5 minutes away, and you're walking through pretty much a third world country. And to see that, it was just amazing. It was amazing to be able to take part in that. But one of the things, I've learned our church has always created a culture in evangelism. And one of the things that I've learned many years ago when it comes to evangelism is that we really don't do much. Amen. We're not special, right? Maybe some of you think you're special, right? We're not special. We don't come with elegant words, or we don't come with a lot of, heavy-duty training. But what it is we do come with is a heart. And I've learned that basically when we go to help. And we go not just to help, but for God to do something in our lives. And as we give and we lay it all out there at the front line, we also know that God's going to do something in our lives. And that's really what I was looking forward to, is what God was going to do in my life. What God was going to pour into. Why would God tug me to go to Panama? For what reason? For what reason? And so one of the days as I was there, we were praying, and it was a very unique moment because, we're there about an hour and a half before the chapel service, and we're praying and getting a hold of God. And I remember the day clearly. I got there and I was getting into worship and prayer, and all of a sudden the Lord took over my prayer. And it was almost like a movie. It was almost like, I don't want to go as far as say a vision, but it was almost like a movie that the Lord started to replay in my mind. And as I was going and I was sitting there, and the Lord just began to replay moments in my life. And I remember, one of the first scenes that the Lord took me in is I remember being on a stretcher. And he replayed a moment when I was sitting there bleeding from 2 holes. And, I remembered that. I remember that moment being in the back of an ambulance dying. And I remember that moment. I remember just tripping man, this is heavy. And I was just thanking the Lord that he spared me. Thanking the Lord that he spared my life. And then he just kept bringing in scenes throughout my life Throughout my whole life were just crazy moments. Remember being in shootouts, and it was so real because I'm there in prayer, and I almost felt like I was sinning because I'm replaying stuff in my head. But I remember another moment where I was, in the middle of a shootout and even feeling the bullets fly by me. And I'm sitting there, and all I could do was just thank God that he spared me. And then replayed another moment in my life where I was in the middle of a huge prison riot, and people left and right are dropping. I mean, they're literally airlifting people out of there. And I remember at the end of that prison riot, just, a couple scrapes, a little bit of blood, but pretty much intact. And I remember just thinking, man, why in the world, when all of these people were dropping, getting airlifted out of there with 19, 20 holes in them, did I make it out of there? And so this whole time of prayer, the Lord was just bringing up these moments where they were very real moments in my life, but all I was doing is reminiscing and just thanking the Lord for his love, thanking the Lord for his grace and his mercy. And I thought that's what the Lord was doing, is he was reminding me of what he had done, and he was. And all I kept remembering and thinking is, man, why in the world didn't I die? Why in the world didn't I die? So fast forward, we go out and hit the streets, and we're hitting it. And then later that night, we went to this neighborhood called Kurundu. That's really what it's called. Right? It's called Kurundu. And we walk in, and I mean, it's just projects as far as the eye can see. We went in probably around 6 or 7 o'clock. It's getting dark. And I mean, just one of the worst projects I've ever been in. I've been in quite a few bad projects, but this was one of the worst. It's kind of like a Hanover Park on steroids. We're walking in there and just, everything imaginable that you can think of is right before your eyes. And I remember they broke everybody up in teams, and there was hundreds of us, but it was such a big project that very, very soon and very shortly after being split up, we were like all alone. And we're walking through these projects, and as we're going in there, we just so happen to see a little alleyway. And, it's made a turn. And it's already getting dark, and as soon as we turned into this alleyway and just made a small turn, I mean, we went into probably one of the most third world, poverty-stricken, drug-infested areas that I've ever been in. I mean, for those of you that have been in the Philippines, it looked just like the squatters on the railroad tracks. And so we're walking through, and it's already dark. And the cops were stationed out front, but even they wouldn't go in there. And we were going in there at our own risk. And as we turned in there, you could feel the oppression, right, Juan? You could feel the hurt and the pain. I mean, it was like you could cut it with a knife. And as soon as we turned in there, we started to minister to people. And I think they were as shocked to see us as we were as shocked to see what was going on. Kids running around, just total madness. People high, eyes bloodshot. Just you could tell nobody goes in there. And as we were in there and we started to minister, the voice of the Lord began to yell in my ear. Yell and said, Eric, this is to answer your prayer from earlier. This is why I kept you alive. This is the reason I kept you alive, because you're going to tell people about my love. You open your mouth, and I'll do the rest. And it was one of those moments where I can honestly say that I felt like I was walking next to Jesus. And there's no greater feeling in the world than to know you're walking with Jesus. No greater feeling in the world. But something in that moment, again, revived inside of me. And it's something that really you can only get when you're in God's will. It's something that happens when you begin to really align yourself to what it is that God wants for your life. These things that you feel that are maybe asleep or dead begin to revive inside of you. I wish I could put you all on a plane to go over there, but we really ain't got to go far to get this revival within your life. See, Lazarus got sick. And Lazarus doesn't really say why he got sick, doesn't really say what had happened, But the bottom line is he got sick. And this was a man who loved God. He was a friend of Jesus. And all we know is that he got sick. And in this family, this godly family that he was involved in with his sisters, and the many times that he met Jesus, something happened in Lazarus' life that caused him to get sick. Now, I'm not saying he was in sin. I'm not saying he did anything wrong. But somewhere along the line, he died. And he got this sickness. And you know, when it comes to us serving the Lord, there's times where good or bad things happen to good people. There's times where good intentions die. There's times where things that were once alive begin to stall out and to die out. So my question is this, is that when it comes to death, why is it so final to us? Yet we see a very clear picture that when it comes to Jesus, even those things that seem dead aren't really dead. There's 4 things that really amazed me as I began to study this when it came to death. Nobody likes to talk about death, right? Nobody likes to talk about it, but it's a fact of life. And as I began to study this, there was some things that people, or I guess you could say doctors, would basically look for to pronounce somebody dead. And I want to share these things with you because they're heavy, right? So you ever wonder why, sometimes it's an obvious death, right? You can see when somebody dies. But as I studied this, there was 4 things that clinically proved that somebody's dead. Clinically. There's 4 things that a doctor or whoever it is checking look for to see if somebody's dead. The first thing that they look for to see if somebody's dead is they check to see that there's no audible breath or a heart sound for greater than a minute. Right? That's the first thing they check for. They check to see if there's any kind of breath coming out of the person or any kind of a sound from their heart for greater than a minute. If there's no sound and if there's no breath for more than a minute, it's one of the signs of death. See, what this has to do with, it has to do with your active bodily functions, right? Bottom line is your body keeps itself alive by breathing and by pumping blood. So when it no longer pumps blood and when it no longer breathes air, it no longer is functioning in its basic form. It's no longer doing what the body was created to do. The second thing people look for when they're checking to see if somebody's dead is they check to see if there's no real pulse for greater than a minute. See, a pulse, what this has to do with is your heart. When your heart stops pumping the way it was created to do, life stops. Life stops at that moment. So when they're checking to see if somebody is dead, they check for a pulse. Right? These are not deep points, by the way. All right? This is really what they check for. They check to see if there's a pulse. And if there's no pulse within a minute, that's the second thing they check off to declare somebody dead. It has to do with the heart. And when it's no longer pumping, basically life, as that body knows it, begins to cease. The third thing they check for is to see if a person's pupils are fixed, dilated, and unreactive to light. In other words, and I don't know, if you've ever seen it maybe in movies or even on Cops, right? When they flash the light, and some of you guys remember that, when they flash the light in your eyes. Well, any person that's alive, your eyes begin to react, right? Your body and your eyes immediately respond to light. So when they put light on it, your pupils close. Unless, of course, you're on crack cocaine, but then that's a whole other thing. We're not talking about that tonight, right? Hopefully you're not on crack cocaine. This, when they check it to declare somebody dead, they basically put a direct light on that person's eyes. And this has to do with their vision, because the eyes, even if you're unconscious, the eyes will respond to direct light. When they stop responding to direct light, what it tells the doctor is this. is that your basic motor skills have stopped. In other words, there's no longer any activity in your brain. There's nothing working. When your vision in your eyes stop responding to direct light, basically your motor skills have stopped. And that is the third step of dying. The fourth thing and the last thing that they check for to declare somebody dead is this, is they check to see if there's no response to a painful stimulus. A lot of times this painful stimulus comes in the form of an electric shock, right? What they're doing is this, is they're saying, okay, look it, he's not breathing or she's not breathing. They're not responding, right, to the normal functions of a body. Well, then let's see if a painful stimulus can shake this person up. Let's see if this direct jolt will help this person out. And so what they'll do is they'll give you a shock. And if that don't work, a lot of times, if they don't have a shock, they'll even give you a slap. They'll even give you a pump on your chest. They'll do something to try to get your body to kick into gear. This is the last step. This is the last attempt to bring life out of a dying body. It's the last hope that your heart and your body will kick in. After these 4 steps, if your body still doesn't respond, they declare you clinically dead. Lazarus had gone through all 4 of these. I was going to go into a really big, deep thing about these 4 things, but I think you kind of get the hint of what I'm talking about tonight. If you're no longer responding to your normal functions, you're no longer doing the normal things. You're no longer going to the normal functions. You're no longer going to the prayers. You're no longer going to the life groups. You're no longer functioning as you normally would. You're beginning to die. If there's no real pulse, you're just kind of here, just kind of moving. There's no real beat to you. You're just kind of doing, just kind of functioning a little bit, kind of getting by. You're beginning to die. If a direct light, a direct vision no longer stirs you, the vision, you no longer see it. It's no longer, you're no longer getting a response when you hear people talk about Panama. You hear people talk about missionaries. You hear people talk about great things that God is doing. When that no longer basically makes a response, your basic motor skills have stopped. And lastly, when these painful things begin to happen, when you begin to bump your head against the wall, when you begin to get rebuked because you're not listening, when you're just not hearing it no more, when the big flashlight in your eyes is no longer making you click, and you try to get, someone's coming in, they're trying to jolt you back to life. You're thinking they're yelling at you, they're trying to save your life. They're trying to bring you back. They're trying to get you to respond. Death becomes certain to somebody who's no longer responding. Death is a certain thing. So what happens when you die? I mean, what happens when all of these things begin to happen in your life? When your normal Christianity begins to die? When the vision that God had stirred in your heart begins to die? When the hopes and dreams of becoming a man of God, a woman of God, becoming an arrow for God's glory begin to die. You're no longer responding to the same altar calls. You're no longer responding. What happens when those things begin to die? Do we deny them? Do we act like they're not in the tomb? Like we haven't wrapped them in grave clothes and put them on the shelf? See, Lazarus was very dead. It wasn't a fake thing. It wasn't something that they were trying to manipulate Jesus to get him to come over. It was a very real thing that was happening in Lazarus' life. It was a very real thing that was happening to their family. It was a very real thing. And not only was it real, it was taking place and affecting everybody around them. It affected the sisters. It affected the town. It affected everybody who knew Lazarus and everybody who knew Jesus. Because everybody felt for Lazarus and everybody was questioning Jesus. Where was Jesus in this situation? Why was God not responding? Why was God not coming to the person he loved? Have you ever asked God that? I mean, let's be honest. Have you ever asked God, man, why are you not responding? Maybe some of you don't yell at God. But I've had conversations with God like that. I'm going to be honest. I've had God not answer my prayers. I've been in situations where I'm so confident that God is going to come through, and then it doesn't happen. What then? Huh? What then? I mean, what about those situations in your life that just take the wind out of you? You ever had those? I remember when I was younger, and I've shared this story a couple of times, playing on a playground. And I've always been a little jumbo, right? I've always been a little on the upper side. But remember, I was trying to slide down a slide. I shouldn't have been on the slide. Let's be honest. I probably shouldn't have been on the slide. But, I was still trying to kick it with the kids. And I jumped on the slide, and I didn't make it but 2 feet and flipped over on the side. And I fell. And, all 10 pounds of me hit the floor. And I'll never forget that wind knocked out of me quick. And just that feeling of, man, I want to breathe, but I can't breathe. You ever felt that spiritually? I have, where you want to breathe, but I just can't. I just can't. You see other people worshiping, and you see them jumping, and you see them happy, and you want that. You want that. You're not a bad person. You want that. You don't want to go drink, and you don't want to get high. You don't want to smoke crack, right? You want that. But why can't I get it? Why? Breath knocked out of you. Jesus doesn't view death like we do. Jesus, he views death in the perspective of who he is. And I'll explain that right now. See, we see death as something final. We see death as something that is, as sure as taxes, as they say. But Jesus is the resurrection. He calls himself the resurrection. What does that mean? That means that anything around Jesus comes to life. That means that life, he is the author and the finisher of it. So Jesus, when he looks at our situations, he's looking at it in the perspective of who he is. So the things that we think that are dead, that are no longer, Jesus is saying, nah, it's not a problem. Because he is the resurrection. And just an encounter with Jesus can bring the dead to life. Just an encounter with just having Jesus on the scene can bring a situation that is completely done back to life. We know the story, and I'm not going to labor it, but in a nutshell, Jesus comes on the scene. He even weeps. He even gets involved in what's taking place. He feels for the people. I want to tell you something. Jesus feels for your situation. Don't ever think he don't feel for your situation. Don't ever think he don't cry with you. Don't ever think that Jesus is so far away that he can't feel your pain, that he doesn't feel your loneliness, that he doesn't feel your stress, that he doesn't feel the pressure that you're under. Don't ever think Jesus is too high and mighty. Jesus will get in there and weep with you. Jesus will get in there and feel what you feel. Oh, but having Jesus on the scene changes things. Jesus comes in and he tells him, roll away the rock. He tells him, roll away the rock. Now, to the person that was standing by, And to everybody involved that had seen the death of Lazarus, I know they were tripping. I would have been tripping, right? Let's be honest here. Jesus talking about unburying somebody that's been in that hole for 4 days. Doesn't even say how long he was dead for. It just said he was in the tomb for 4 days. So the bottom line is Jesus calls Lazarus forth, right? We all know the story. He raises him from the dead. But here's the thing, is Jesus was dealing with the disciples' perspective. He was going to do the miracle regardless. But remember in the beginning, we talked about what he was saying to his disciples. He says, our friend Lazarus is asleep, and I'm going to go wake him up. Why was Jesus setting the stage? It's because he was trying to change his disciples' perspective on their situation. Because the world has seen the finality of the death of Lazarus. But before they walked into that situation, Jesus had to let them know, hey, don't worry what's going on and what you're going to walk into. Just know that I'm the resurrection. And he's asleep, and I'm going to go wake him up. Come on, give the Lord a hand for that. It's about perspective. That's what Jesus wants to change tonight in you, is your perspective. Is your perspective. I'm going to end with this. I'm going to ask him to come to the piano. You know, there's situations in our lives that look very final. And there's things inside of many of you tonight that are put on a shelf. Many of them that are even buried. Many of them that have been given up on. Many of them that have been checked in to that tomb and put away. I don't know what brought you to put it there. I don't know what exists, what the reasons were. The loss of hope, the loss of this. I don't know what brought it there. But I do know it exists. And I'm not here to say that the things that have happened to you are not real. I'm not here to say that the things you've been through are not something that you should feel or go through, or even, I'm not even saying that what you're feeling right now is not real. What I am saying is this, is when you see Jesus and the perspective that he has on our lives, it ain't over. It ain't over. The dreams and the hopes and the plans, it ain't over. It ain't over. It's not over for your family. It's not over for your calling. It's not over for what God has put into your life. It's not over. It's not over. Now maybe you think it's over, but I'm here to tell you it's just sleeping. It's just sleeping tonight. That thing that you thought was going to happen is just sleeping. It's just sleeping. The gifts that you thought were gone, they're just sleeping. The call of God on your life that you thought was over, it's just sleeping. Here tonight, Jesus is coming to wake him up. He's coming. He's on the scene. He is the resurrection. He is the resurrection. Jesus changes everything. That's all it took, was for Jesus to show up. It's perspective. What you do with your life, it's about perspective. What makes a person like Juan and Gloria jump on a plane? Huh? And their latter years, full of gray hair. The silver fox. Why? Because it ain't over. I don't know, maybe you thought it was over, but it's not over. It's not over. It's not over. There's still fight inside of you. There's still cities with your name on it. There's still ministries with your name on it. I want to share this story and I'm done. We're in the middle of Panama. It's hot. Hot, hot. Did I mention it was hot? It's hot. I mean, I'm already dark. I didn't need a suntan. Man, it was hot. Passing out flyers. And we're in this place called San Miguelito. There must have been 50 of us out there. And I swear it felt like we were alone. There was that many people. Crowded place. And we're hitting it. We're out there pouring sweat. Eric almost fainted. True story, right? We're hitting it. And one of the people that we gave a flyer to, she just grabbed it and she kept walking. And all of a sudden she turns around and she walks up to me. She goes, "Is this the Victory Outreach that has a recovery home?" I said, "Yeah, that's us." And she goes, "I watched a program called Treasures from Mexico. And she goes, I'm a Christian." She goes, "My whole family's a Christian." She goes, "My brother is hooked on cocaine. He's been holed up in the house for months. We don't know what to do to help him." She goes, "Me and my family have been praying." Right, Erica? Praying. She starts crying. She goes, "We prayed and wondering when is Victory Outreach coming to Panama?" Just crying. "When is Victory Outreach coming to Panama?" I said, "We're here. We've come. We're here." But you know what really, like, it was years she's been praying. Years, and we're just barely getting there. It puts things in perspective. That people are waiting for us to get our act together. It's true. People are waiting for us to get our act together, man. And I know it's really easy to just go throughout daily life. Guilty of it. But when you put things in perspective and you got people that don't know what to do, they don't know what to do. There is no answer. There is no other hope but somebody from Victory Outreach coming. They're waiting for us to get it together, to get our act right. It's just sleeping, guys. It's just sleeping. But only you can allow Jesus to resurrect it. I want every head bowed and every eye closed.